My name is Rachel Morgan, and all my life I was the daughter who never mattered, the one whose birthdays were forgotten, whose victories were ignored while every spotlight shone on my younger sister Lily. When my grandmother passed, she finally saw me in a way no one else ever had. She left me her inheritance, a legacy worth more than money. It was proof that I mattered. But my parents called me selfish, told me family meant giving it all to Lily, and swore I would be cut off if I refused. They cornered me, believing I would bend like always. What they never expected was that I had already made my move. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, don't forget to hit subscribe, smash like button, and tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. I was 34 when I found myself sitting in a mahogany-paneled office in downtown San Jose, staring at the framed degrees on the wall while the air conditioner hummed faintly above. My palms were damp against my skirt, and though I tried to keep my breathing steady, my chest rose and fell in shallow bursts. Across from me sat my parents, Charles and Margaret, both in their early 60s, still wearing the air of authority they had carried my whole life. Beside them was my younger sister Lily, impeccably dressed in a pastel blazer, her hair styled in waves that seemed almost rehearsed. Her mascara already looked smudged, as if she had anticipated tears. At the head of the table, attorney Janet Miller shuffled a neat stack of papers. The room was small, just big enough for the heavy oak table and 6 chairs, and the fluorescent lights gave everything a sterile glow. A faint scent of lemon polish clung to the wood, mixing with the perfume my mother wore. Something floral and sharp that reminded me of every Sunday church service of my childhood. Janet cleared her throat. We're here today to read the last will and testament of Eleanor Hayes, executed in 2020, witnessed and notarized. As you know, Mrs. Hayes passed away last spring at the age of 82. She left specific instructions, and I'm here to honor them. I gripped the arms of my chair, bracing myself. Even now, months after my grandmother's funeral, it still felt unreal that she was gone. Eleanor had been my anchor, the only person who saw me not as the independent daughter who needed nothing, but as a woman who deserved to be seen. Janet began with small bequests. Family photo albums to Aunt Patricia, a set of china dishes to Uncle George. My mother nodded impatiently. My father tapped his foot. Lily wiped at a non-existent tear. Then Janet turned the page, and her tone shifted. To my beloved granddaughter, Rachel Morgan, she read, I leave my shares in Next Vision Technologies, originally purchased in 2010 and held in trust until now. As of the most recent valuation, they are worth approximately $800,000. These shares are to be transferred solely to Rachel, with no stipulations, no co-signers, and no requirements of division. The silence was instant and deafening. I heard the faint hum of the AC, the creak of leather as my father stiffened the sharp intake of breath from my mother. My own heart hammered against my ribs. I tried to swallow, but my throat was too dry. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. What? Her voice cracked higher than I'd ever heard it. My father leaned forward, his brow furrowed deep. Are you certain you read that correctly? Janet looked up calmly. These are Mrs. Hayes's signed wishes. Lily's chair scraped against the tile as she shot to her feet, her voice breaking. No, that can't be right. Grandma loved me. She always said I reminded her of herself. Why would she give everything to Rachel? Her words rang in my ears, sharp as glass. My fingers curled tighter around the chair nails, biting into wood. I glanced at my mother, who was staring at Janet as though sheer willpower could change the ink on the page. My father's lips had thinned into a grim line. Janet continued, her voice steady. Mrs. Hayes was very clear in her intentions. The documentation is legally binding. Lily's eyes brimmed with tears, her face twisted in disbelief. She can't do this to me. She knew how much I needed her support. Rachel doesn't even need it. She already has her job, her apartment, her life together. I'm the one starting out. I'm the one. Lily. My father's voice was low, a warning. But Lily's outburst had already broken the veneer of composure in the room. My mother slammed her hand on the table. "This doesn't make sense. Eleanor must have been pressured. She wasn't thinking clearly." I finally found my voice, though it trembled. She knew exactly what she was doing. The words hung in the air, fragile but undeniable. For the first time, all eyes turned to me, not as the quiet, dependable daughter who faded into the background, but as the one suddenly holding the center of gravity. Inside, I felt the familiar ache, the echo of years of being sidelined, ignored, called selfish when I asked for scraps of attention. Yet beneath that ache was something sturdier. My grandmother's faith in me crystallized into a legal document no one could wish away. Lily's voice cracked into a wail. No. She loved me more. She always did. The room seemed to tilt with her cry, but I sat still, my hands now steady against the chair. For once, I was not the outsider. For once, I was the one chosen. And as the arguments began to rise around me, voices, colliding chairs, scraping my grandmother's words, echoed in my mind. "You are stronger than they will ever admit. Don't forget it." I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just sat there silent as the storm broke over me. I was 16 the year my parents forgot my birthday. Or maybe forgot is too generous a word. They knew, of course. They just had better plans. Lily had a school dance coming up, and Mom had promised to take her shopping for the perfect dress. Dad tagged along carrying bags and pretending to grumble, though he always lit up when Lily spun around in front of him fishing for compliments. I sat at home with a store-bought cake I had bought myself from the corner bakery. Chocolate, because that was all they had left in the display case. I lit one candle, sang softly under my breath, and blew it out. The silence afterward felt heavier than the frosting on my tongue. I tried to laugh at myself, but it came out cracked. When they returned later that evening, arms loaded with Nordstrom bags, Lily twirling with glee. Mom smiled as though nothing was amiss. "Oh, Rachel, you're still up. Don't you have homework?" She never even glanced at the wilted candle stub on the kitchen counter. I learned that day how invisible you could feel even in your own home. Years later, that same invisibility followed me to college. I worked 2 part-time jobs. Library clerk during the day, waitress at a diner at night, just to pay for my tuition at San Jose State. I studied until my eyes blurred, clawing my way to every scholarship and honor roll I could find. When graduation day finally came, I slipped into my cap and gown alone. I scanned the crowd from the stage, hoping foolishly that they might surprise me, that they'd show up with flowers, a camera, a smile of pride. My phone buzzed later after I had already walked across the stage, after I had already tossed my cap into the air and collected my diploma. One text, "Congrats." That was it. From Dad, no exclamation mark, no heart, no photo of them clapping in the stands, just a flat, indifferent word. 2 years later, Lily graduated late, having changed majors twice. For her, they rented a hotel ballroom in Palo Alto, decorated it with balloons, hired a photographer. There was champagne, a guest list of 50 speeches about her brilliance, her resilience. I was there too, in the back, holding a glass of sparkling water because I couldn't afford the bar tab. I smiled when the photographer's flash lit up Lily's grin, but inside my chest burned. It wasn't that I begrudged her success. She was my sister. But the scales had never been even, and each year the tilt grew sharper. At family dinners, the imbalance was a steady drumbeat. Lily would share her latest art project or talk about her marketing internship, and my parents would clap like she'd just cured cancer. "So creative," Mom would say, "so innovative." Then I would slide my report card across the table. Straight A's, the kind of grades other parents would frame. Dad would glance at it for 2 seconds, clear his throat, and change the subject. "Did you see Lily's presentation?" "They said it was the best in the class." The words sank like stones, heavy and cold. Grandma Eleanor was the only one who noticed. She would sit beside me after dinner, her lavender perfume wrapping around me, and press my hand. "You're brilliant, Rachel," she whispered. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." She framed my first business card when I landed my accounting internship. She hugged me tight when I passed the CPA exam. She showed up at my apartment with lasagna when I thought no one remembered. It was always her applause that carried me, her belief that stitched me back together when the cracks threatened to spread. Still, even her warmth couldn't shield me from the constant sting of being overlooked. I remember one night in particular, sitting in my tiny apartment after a long shift. My phone buzzed and I opened Facebook. There it was, a photo of Mom and Lily clinking champagne glasses at Nordstrom bags piled high around them. The caption read, "Shopping day with my baby girl. So blessed." The date on the post was July 14th, my birthday. I stared at the screen, my throat tightening until I could barely breathe. My birthday cake sat untouched on the counter, a simple vanilla cake I had picked up that morning. I hadn't wanted a big celebration, just maybe a call-a-dinner moment that said I mattered. Instead, my mother had chosen sequined dresses and champagne flutes. I closed the app and turned off the lights, sitting in the quiet with the glow of the city pressing through my blinds. The ache was familiar by then, an old companion, but that night it cut deeper than usual. It wasn't just that they forgot, it was that they chose. And I knew with a clarity that hollowed me out that I would never be the chosen one in their eyes. Grandma's voice echoed in my memory, a soft murmur against the storm. They don't love her more, sweetheart. They love themselves more. And Lily reflects what they wish they were. You reflect who they really are, and that terrifies them. I held on to those words like a lifeline, even as my phone buzzed again with a notification. Another photo. Another smile from Mom and Lily. Another reminder that in my family's story, I was the afterthought. I shut the phone off and leaned back, letting the darkness settle around me, promising myself that one day, somehow, I would no longer be invisible. The morning after the will reading, my phone buzzed before the sun was even up. The vibration rattled against my nightstand, pulling me from restless sleep. I squinted at the screen. Dad. I let it ring once, twice, but by the third call I gave in. "Hello?" My voice was rough. Rachel Dad's voice was clipped stern, the same tone he used when I broke curfew in high school. "You need to think about the family. That inheritance doesn't belong to just you. It's your responsibility to share it." I sat up, pressing my forehead to my palm. "Dad, it was Grandma's decision, not mine." There was a pause, then Mom's voice chimed in on speaker syrupy but edged with steel. "Honey, your sister is just getting started in her career. She needs this stability. Don't be selfish. Be reasonable." The call ended abruptly, leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. I tried to shove the phone aside, but it lit up again within minutes. A new number. Lily. I opened her email instead, the subject line reading, "Please, Rachel." It stretched on for pages, her words dripping desperation. "I know you already have your own place. I'm drowning. If I could just have Grandma's shares, I could finally prove to Daniel that I deserve to be at Next Vision. He would see I'm serious about my future. Please, I'm begging you." I closed the laptop with more force than I intended. By noon, my phone was a war zone. Texts, missed calls, voicemails piling up. My parents rotated between guilt and rage. Family means sacrifice. Don't disappoint us again. Think about your sister for once. I tried turning my phone to silent, but even then the screen kept flashing with messages. I set it face down, only to hear the ding of another email. It felt like the walls of my small San Jose apartment were closing in on me. I busied myself with chores. Washing dishes, folding laundry, anything to drown out the sound of incoming messages. But the constant buzzing followed me like a swarm of bees. I burned dinner because I jumped at another call. I left the laundry half folded when another text lit up. "Answer us. Stop ignoring your family." By evening, I was exhausted from doing nothing but defending my silence. I curled up on the couch, the glow of my phone casting light across the darkened room. My chest tightened with every notification, like I was being slowly strangled by obligations I never agreed to. Finally, just after 10, a text came through from Dad that froze me in place. Either you sign those shares over to your sister, or you are no longer my daughter. Your choice. I stared at the words, my breath shallow. The letters blurred not from tears. I was too drained to cry, but from the sheer weight of them. My hands trembled as I set the phone down on the coffee table. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the fridge and the faint traffic outside. For a long time I just sat there staring at the glowing screen. Part of me wanted to scream, to hurl the phone against the wall, to call them back, and finally shout the truth, that I had been overlooked, dismissed, abandoned, while they poured every ounce of themselves into Lily. But the words caught in my throat, swallowed by years of training myself to stay quiet, to endure. I leaned back, pressing my head against the couch cushion, and let the silence seep back in. My grandmother's framed photo on the bookshelf caught my eye. She was smiling her arm around me at my college graduation, the one moment someone had cared enough to show up. I whispered into the empty room, "What do I do?" "Grandma." The phone buzzed again and again, but I didn't move. For once I let it ring. I let it all pile up until the screen went black. The words "no longer my daughter" echoed in the dark, and I sat frozen, hollowed out, unsure whether I was mourning the threat or realizing I'd already been treated like an outsider my whole life. It was a Saturday evening when my phone rang, Mom's name flashing across the screen. Her voice was firm, almost rehearsed. "Rachel, we're all meeting at Aunt Patricia's tonight, 7 o'clock sharp. You need to be there." Before I could reply, the line went dead. The drive to Patricia's house in Sunnyvale felt heavier than usual. Her place had always smelled of pot roast and old carpet, but tonight as I stepped into the living room, the air was thick with tension instead of comfort. Every seat was taken. Dad in his usual stiff-backed chair, Mom perched beside him, Lily dabbing her eyes theatrically with a tissue. Patricia sat like a judge behind her coffee table, and Uncle George leaned against the mantel, arms crossed. A couple of cousins I hadn't spoken to in years looked up at me with smug curiosity. "Sit down," Patricia said, pointing to the lone chair placed in the center of the room. It wasn't near the couch, not near the coffee table, just in the middle, exposed. As I lowered myself into it, I realized exactly what this was. A tribunal! Mom began, voice smooth but sharp. "Rachel, you've always been the strong one. You've never needed as much as Lily. You've had jobs, you've had stability. Isn't it fair to think about your sister for once?" Dad added. "Your grandmother couldn't have meant for you to keep all those shares. $800,000. That's family money. It was supposed to lift everyone, not just you." I clenched my jaw. "It wasn't your money. It wasn't Lily's. Grandma chose." Patricia leaned forward, her pearls catching the lamplight. "Don't take that tone, young lady. Your grandmother was old. People get confused. Maybe you spent too much time filling her head with ideas." Heat rose to my face, but before I could answer, Lily's voice broke in. "I don't understand why you're being so cruel, Rachel. I've worked so hard. Don't you care if I succeed?" I turned to her, my voice low. "You've been handed everything. You don't even know what it means to struggle." She gasped, clutching her chest as if I'd slapped her. Mom immediately rushed in. "Enough. We are not here to attack Lily. We are here because you, Rachel, are putting this family in jeopardy." Uncle George grunted from the mantel. "She's got a point, though. You can't hog something like that. Family comes first. Always has. Always has." The words echoed like a joke. Family had never come first when it came to me. The room buzzed with voices, each piling on. "Think about Lily's future. You're already fine, you don't need it. Don't be greedy." I sat there, heart pounding, every accusation landing like a stone. I wanted to shout, to remind them of every birthday forgotten, every graduation skipped, every time I was pushed aside so Lily could shine. But the words stuck heavy and useless. Instead, I heard my grandmother's voice in my memory. "Don't show them your next move." So I kept my mouth shut. Patricia finally raised her hand, silencing the room. Let me say what everyone is thinking. If Eleanor had been truly clear-headed, she would have divided the inheritance equally. No decent woman would pit sisters against each other like this. For you to keep it all, Rachel, is nothing but selfish. Her eyes drilled into me, the final gavel of her judgment. I bit down on the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood, forcing myself not to speak, not to cry, not to give them the satisfaction. Silence stretched. All of them waited for me to crumble, to apologize, to hand over the one thing my grandmother had trusted me with. But I stayed still, lips pressed tight, the weight of their stares pressing in. And in that suffocating room surrounded by my own blood, I realized what I had always been to them. A defendant on trial for daring to keep what was mine. It was close to midnight when my phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't my parents or Lily. The number was unfamiliar, the area code from Palo Alto. Against my better judgment, I opened the message. Rachel, this is Daniel Chen. I heard through a colleague you might be considering selling your grandmother's shares. I'm interested, but only if you want to control how this plays out. I stared at the screen, blinking, convinced fatigue was making me hallucinate. Daniel Chen, CEO of Next Vision Technologies. And more than that, my old study partner from college, the one who used to sit across from me in the library while everyone else went out to parties. The memories came quickly. Daniel hunched over his laptop, empty coffee cups stacked beside him. Me scribbling notes with a highlighter until my hand cramped. We were the ones who never got invited to the keggers, the ones who carried granola bars in our backpacks because we couldn't afford takeout every night. He had laughed once, telling me, one day they'll all work for us. I thought he was joking. Now, more than a decade later, he actually ran one of the fastest-growing tech firms in Silicon Valley. And my sister Lily worked under him, bragging constantly about how close she was to the top. I typed a shaky reply. Daniel, it's been a long time. His answer came within minutes. Yes. Can we meet tomorrow? Somewhere quiet. I hesitated, chewing the inside of my cheek. My parents' threats still echoed in my head, but the thought of walking into another ambush without a plan made me nauseous. If Daniel really wanted to help, or at least offer a way out, I had to hear him out. The next evening, I drove to a small cafe tucked on a side street in Mountain View. One of those places with dim lighting and brick walls quiet enough for serious conversations. Daniel was already there, seated at a corner table wearing a simple button-down instead of the polished suits I'd seen in press photos. When he saw me, he stood smiling faintly. Rachel, it's good to see you. I sat across from him, still wary. It's been what? 12 years. 13, he corrected gently. But you look exactly the same. Focused. Tired, maybe? His eyes softened. I remember those nights in the library. Everyone else was out drinking, but you were buried in tax law textbooks. I thought, she's going to be unstoppable someday. I laughed, though it came out brittle. Funny, my family never saw it that way. I know. His tone shifted, more serious. I saw how they treated you, always putting Lily on a pedestal, leaving you in the shadows. And now they're trying to strip you of what your grandmother left you. I wrapped my hands around the warm coffee cup in front of me. They're relentless. Calls, messages, meetings. They won't stop until I cave. Then don't give them the chance. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. You have something they want, something valuable. But you don't owe them anything. You can choose who to deal with, and if you choose me, I can guarantee the shares go to someone who won't fold under their pressure. My chest tightened. You mean sell them to you? To Next Vision. Yes, quietly, legally, clean. I'll pay market value, even above if necessary. That way they'll never get their hands on them. And it won't just protect you. It will expose their greed for what it is. I sat back, heart racing. This was bigger than I had imagined. Not just a transaction, but a shift in power. If Lily discovered her boss had bought the shares her parents demanded, it would flip their entire narrative upside down. Daniel studied me. Rachel, I'm not saying this as a favor. I want those shares. They're valuable for the company's future, but I also want you to finally have control. They've belittled you long enough. This is your ace in the hole." The hum of the espresso machine filled the pause between us. I stared at the swirling foam on my cappuccino, hearing my grandmother's voice again. "Don't let them decide for you." Finally, I looked up, meeting his steady gaze. "If I do this, it has to stay between us. No leaks. No one finds out until it's too late to undo." He nodded once. "Absolute confidentiality. You have my word." I took a deep breath, my pulse thrumming in my ears. For years, I had been the quiet one, the dependable one, the one who gave way so Lily could shine. And now, sitting across from the man who once shared my late-night granola bars, I realized I had a chance to rewrite that role. "All right," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Let's do it. But it has to stay secret until the moment it matters most." Daniel's smile was small but certain. Then it settled. I reached for my coffee again, hands no longer shaking. For the first time in weeks, maybe years, I felt the ground tilt back beneath my feet. Not against me, but toward me. Janet Miller's office in downtown San Jose was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every sound sharp. The shuffle of papers, the click of her pen, the faint ticking of the wall clock, all of it filled the space as I sat across from her desk. She was methodical, flipping through the thick folder of documents Daniel's team had prepared. "These terms are straightforward," she said, adjusting her glasses. "The shares transfer directly to Next Vision Technologies under Daniel Chen's authority. The payment is set at $800,000 wired immediately after filing. It's airtight." I nodded, though my palms were slick against my skirt. "And once it's done, there's no going back. Once you sign," she said, looking me in the eye, "the transfer is recorded with the county and the SEC. No contest, no reversal. If your parents try to challenge it, they won't have a legal leg to stand on." My throat tightened, but I forced myself to breathe. For weeks, my parents' voices had been in my head, shouting, accusing, demanding. Now finally, there was only mine. Janet slid the pen toward me. "Rachel, this is your choice, no one else's." I picked it up, the weight of it heavier than any exam pencil I'd ever held, heavier than the diplomas and certifications I'd spent years chasing. My hand trembled as I lowered the tip to the page, but my gaze was steady. When the ink met the paper, my voice echoed in my head, like it belonged to someone braver than me. For the first time, I'm not standing outside the story of my own life. By the time I finished the last signature, my hands were damp, but my chest felt lighter. Janet collected the pages, pressing them neatly into a folder. "Congratulations," she said softly. "It's done." I leaned back in the chair, exhaling. Done. My phone buzzed in my bag. Again. And again. I didn't even need to look. I pulled it out anyway. A string of missed calls from Dad, a dozen texts from Mom, each one sharper than the last. "Answer us. Don't ignore your family. Lily is crying herself sick. Grandma would want you to share." I dropped the phone face down on the desk, the vibration rattling against the wood like an angry insect. "Do you want me to hold on to this until we're through?" Janet asked, raising a brow. "No," I said, sliding it back into my bag. "Let them scream into the void. I'm done listening." She gave me a small smile, not unkind, then handed me a copy of the executed agreement. The folder felt heavier than it should have, as though all the years of silence, of swallowing my pride, were pressed into its edges. I slipped it carefully into my tote bag, running my fingers over the leather strap. My father's ultimatum replayed in my head. Either give it up or you're no longer my daughter. For the first time, the words didn't hollow me out. They rang against steel instead. I straightened my jacket and shook Janet's hand. "Thank you." Outside, the late afternoon sun spread gold across the street. Cars honked, people hurried by with coffees and laptops, the world moving forward like nothing had shifted. But for me, everything had. I walked slowly to my car, my bag pressed close to my side, the folder secure inside. With every step, the air felt clearer, like I was finally breathing on my own terms. When I slid into the driver's seat, my phone buzzed again. I ignored it, started the engine, and let the radio fill the silence. The contract sat in my bag, a quiet promise at my side. For the first time in years, I felt calm. The conference room smelled faintly of coffee and furniture polish, though nothing could cut through the tension that pressed down on my shoulders the moment I stepped inside. The long oak table was already packed. My parents sat side by side, their postures stiff and unyielding. Lily perched between them, eyes red-rimmed but perfectly made-up tissues clutched in her hand like props. Aunt Patricia and Uncle George leaned against the far wall, whispering as if they were jurors conferring. Even a real estate agent I'd never seen before, a woman in a sharp red blazer, shuffled papers as if she had already listed something that wasn't hers to sell. And next to them, a man in a gray suit. Another lawyer. Not Janet, but someone they'd clearly brought to swing their weight. Rachel, Mom said, her voice taut but dripping with sugar. "We're glad you came. We all just want to resolve this as a family." Dad added, his jaw clenched. "And if you'd only be reasonable, this wouldn't need to get ugly." Janet sat at the head of the table, calm, and measured, flipping through her notes. "Let's be clear," she said, her voice even. The shares of Next Vision Technologies were legally left to Rachel Morgan under the will of Eleanor Hayes. Until and unless she decides otherwise, those shares are her sole property. The lawyer my parents had hired leaned forward. "We're here because there is evidence of undue influence. Mrs. Hayes was elderly. She was vulnerable. We believe Rachel manipulated her into leaving everything to herself." I let out a hollow laugh before I could stop it. Manipulated her. She was sharper at 82 than half the people in this room. "Watch your tone," Dad barked. Janet's eyes flicked to me, a subtle warning to stay calm, but my heart was pounding too loud in my ears to register much else. The red blazer realtor slid a folder across the table, opening it dramatically. "If we move quickly, I have buyers lined up. Cash offers. It would be in everyone's best interest to sell now, divide the proceeds, and put this unpleasantness behind you." I stared at the glossy brochures peeking out of the folder. My grandmother's legacy, treated like a piece of prime property on the market, reduced to numbers and offers. Heat rose in my chest, but I kept my hands flat against the table. Janet cleared her throat. "With all due respect, Mrs. Patterson, there is no property to sell. The shares belong to my client. Unless she agrees to a transaction, this discussion is moot." Mom's voice sharpened. "Rachel, stop dragging this out. Lily needs this chance. You already have a career and apartment stability. How can you sit there and watch your sister struggle?" "Struggle," I snapped, finally lifting my gaze to her. "She lives in a luxury complex in Palo Alto, drives a car you co-signed, and works in a job you got her through connections. Tell me again how she's struggling." Lily gasped, her tissue fluttering dramatically. "Why are you attacking me? I just want fairness." "Fairness." My laugh broke sharper this time. "Where was fairness when I worked double shifts to pay tuition while you went to summer camps in Europe? Where was fairness when my graduation was ignored and yours was a gala?" Enough. Dad slammed his hand on the table, the sound reverberating. "This isn't about the past. This is about doing what's right. If you don't sign those shares over, you're out. No birthdays, no holidays, no contact with this family." His words hung in the air like smoke. Aunt Patricia shifted uncomfortably. Uncle George looked at his shoes, but no one spoke up. Janet raised her voice, steady as steel. "Mr. Morgan, your threats don't change the law. Rachel is under no obligation to surrender her inheritance, unless she chooses this matter is settled." The room seemed to lean toward me, waiting. The lawyer beside my parents smirked as if certain I'd crumble. Mom squeezed Lily's hand theatrically. The realtor pushed the folder closer. Dad's glare bore into me, daring me to disobey. I let the silence stretch until even the clock on the wall sounded too loud. Then I folded my hands neatly on the table and looked directly at them. Actually, I said, my voice calm but clear. There's nothing left to argue over. Dad's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? I leaned back in my chair, letting my gaze sweep over the room. It's already done. I sold the shares 3 days ago. The effect was immediate. Mom's face went pale, her lips parted in disbelief. Lily froze mid-sob, her tissue dropping to the table. The lawyer blinked, thrown off script. The realtor snapped the folder shut as though burned. The entire room fell into a stunned, suffocating silence, and for the first time in my life I didn't feel small sitting in their judgment. I felt unshakable. The drive to Palo Alto was suffocating. My parents' SUV trailed close behind my sedan headlights, glaring in my rearview mirror, like a predator stalking its prey. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my tote bag with the signed contract resting on the passenger seat. Every muscle in my body was taut, but my mind was oddly calm. They wanted proof. Tonight they would get it. When I pulled into the sleek parking lot of Next Vision Technologies, the building loomed above us. Glass walls gleaming in the evening light, security guards stationed at the entrance. It was nothing like the cozy family homes my parents were used to manipulating. This was a fortress, one they couldn't bully their way into. I parked near the front. As I stepped out, my heels clicked against the pavement, echoing louder than I felt inside. Behind me, car doors slammed shut. Mom's voice rang out sharp and impatient. "Rachel, what is this? Why are we here? You'll see," I said, simply walking ahead. The guards at the entrance nodded at me as if they had been briefed. One pressed a button and the glass doors slid open with a hiss. Parents. Lily, Aunt Patricia, Uncle George, even the realtor in her red blazer followed, muttering in confusion. Inside, the lobby glowed with polished marble floors and a massive LED display scrolling the company's achievements. Employees passed us with curious glances. Lily's steps faltered as she took in the familiar surroundings. Her workplace, the place she bragged about endlessly. Then, from the far end of the lobby, Daniel Chen appeared. He wore a tailored navy jacket, no tie, his expression calm but commanding. His presence seemed to shift the air, drawing every eye in the room. He extended his hand toward me first. "Rachel, right on time?" Mom's jaw tightened. What is this about? Daniel turned, addressing the group with the ease of someone used to boardrooms full of doubters. "I assume you're here because of the transaction. Allow me to confirm Next Vision Technologies purchased Eleanor Hayes' shares from Rachel Morgan last week. The sale is complete, legally binding, and cannot be reversed." The words dropped like a gavel. Lily's face drained of color. "No," she whispered, her voice catching. That's impossible." Mom clutched her chest. "You can't just... She's her sister. Family comes first." Daniel's gaze was steady, unwavering. "Family matters are your business. This was a corporate transaction, and Rachel had every right to sell. She remains a minor shareholder, but the controlling interest is now with my company." Dad's voice boomed across the lobby. "This is fraud. She tricked you. She doesn't know what she's doing." I lifted my chin. I knew exactly what I was doing. Daniel turned his attention to Lily, his tone shifting but no less firm. "And as for you, Ms. Morgan, your position here is unaffected, but I expect you to perform your duties to the same standards as everyone else. If you fail, you'll be held accountable. Do you understand?" Lily's hands trembled, the tissue she clutched, now shredded into pieces. "You," she stammered, staring at me, then at Daniel. "You can't do this to me. She's doing this to humiliate me." "This isn't about humiliation," Daniel said flatly. "It's about business." The silence that followed was piercing. Mom looked like she wanted to scream but couldn't form words. Dad's fists clenched at his sides. Aunt Patricia's lips pressed thin, and Uncle George shifted uneasily. Even the realtor had stepped back, sensing her part in this theater was over. I could feel their eyes on me, a lifetime of expectation and resentment, crashing against the reality that for once they had lost. My grandmother's choice had been honored. My voice had carried weight. Lily swayed slightly as if the floor beneath her had given way. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked small for the first time in her life, stripped of the certainty that the world would bend for her. And in that suspended moment as they all stood frozen in disbelief, I finally exhaled. Word spread through the Next Vision office faster than any press release. By Monday morning, whispers trailed Lily like shadows. I heard them in passing as I crossed the lobby on my way to a meeting with finance. "Did you hear the CEO bought out her sister's shares?" Another voice hushed but pointed. "Yeah, and that sister is still a shareholder. Imagine being Lily right now." By the time I walked past the open-plan desks of the marketing department, the atmosphere was electric. Lily sat rigid in her chair, her jaw tight, staring at her monitor as though she could drown out the murmurs with sheer focus. But her co-workers didn't even try to hide it. "She's lucky," one muttered. "Most people would have been fired if their family drama spilled into the company." "Doesn't matter," another replied. "If she doesn't perform, no amount of family connection is going to save her. Not now." Jennifer Wu appeared in the middle of the room, her heels clicking against the polished concrete floor. She carried a folder under her arm, her tone clipped but professional. "Lily, my office." "Now?" I caught the way Lily's face drained before she plastered on a smile and followed. I didn't linger, but later that afternoon, I overheard Jennifer's instructions relayed second-hand new performance goals higher than before. Weekly reports submitted every Friday. Sales growth targets bumped up, no exceptions. Lily came back pale, holding the folder like a verdict. "She's not going to last," one of her team members whispered, not caring that Lily could hear. "Even with a CEO in her corner? If he even is." That line stung more than the others, and I saw Lily flinch. For the next few days, I watched her unravel. She stayed late, typing furiously at her desk long after most of the team had gone home. She snapped at interns, shuffled slides in her presentations until her hands shook, and forced smiles during meetings that never quite reached her eyes. But the strain showed. Numbers didn't climb. The reports she submitted were riddled with errors. The sharp comments from coworkers grew louder, crueler. Having a shareholder sister won't fix those mistakes. She should just quit before she drags the team down. By Wednesday, I walked into the restroom to find the middle stall locked, muffled sobs leaking through. A few seconds later, I heard Lily's voice, frantic and broken, whispering into her phone. "Mom, I can't take this anymore. They're all laughing at me. They think I'm a joke." There was a pause, then her choked cry. "I don't know how much longer I can stand it. You have to make Rachel stop. Please." I froze, torn between pity and the sharp memory of every slight she'd dealt me. I left quietly, the sound of her sobs following me out the door. By Friday morning, the breaking point came. Jennifer stood at the front of the department, a tablet in hand. "Lily," she said evenly, "I've reviewed your numbers. They're not where they need to be. I've sent you an official performance warning by email. Please confirm receipt by the end of the day." The entire office went silent, every eye flicking toward Lily. Her hands hovered above her keyboard, her face going rigid as she read the message on her screen. Her voice trembled as she muttered, "This isn't fair." No one answered. I watched from the doorway, my stomach twisting. Lily's world, the one where she was always untouchable, always the star, was collapsing piece by piece, and there was nothing my parents could do to shield her. When she finally stood, clutching her laptop to her chest, she looked like a ghost of herself. And for the first time, she seemed to understand what it meant to be truly vulnerable. By Sunday morning, my phone lit up with notifications. At first, I thought it was more work emails, but then I saw Mom's profile picture flashing across the screen. She had posted on Facebook the words bold and venomous, "When money means more than family, daughters betray their own blood." The comments piled up fast. Old family friends chimed in with vague sympathies. "So sorry you're going through this. Praying for healing." But mixed in were sharper words. One in particular stood out from Mrs. Brown, our longtime neighbor from Willow Lane. "Margaret, that's not the truth. Eleanor trusted Rachel because she told us all about the favoritism in your house. She knew exactly what she was doing. It felt like the world tilted. Someone had said it out loud, the thing I had carried in silence for decades." Mom fired back instantly. How dare you accuse me of favoritism? You don't know what went on in our family. But Mrs. Brown wasn't backing down. We know plenty. We saw Rachel walking to school alone while you chauffeured Lily. We saw the birthday parties for one daughter while the other's day was ignored. Don't pretend we didn't notice. The thread exploded. Cousins took sides, some parroting Mom's words, others quietly agreeing with Mrs. Brown. Screenshots flew into the extended family group chat. My phone buzzed nonstop as uncles and aunts flooded the thread with outrage. Uncle George wrote, "Rachel needs to apologize and return the shares. This is tearing us apart." One of my cousins I hadn't spoken to in years replied, "Maybe it's time the truth came out. You all treated her like she didn't exist." The family group chat splintered arguments, branching into side conversations, insults thrown, tears dramatized in emojis and capital letters. It was chaos, ugly, exhausting chaos. And for once, none of it was aimed at me directly. I shut my phone off and slipped it into a drawer needing air. That afternoon, I walked down to the farmer's market in downtown San Jose, the kind of place Grandma used to love. The smell of ripe peaches and fresh bread lingered in the air, vendors calling out prices, children tugging at their parents' hands. It was grounding, ordinary, safe. I was scanning baskets of strawberries when I heard my name. Rachel. I turned to see Mrs. Brown clutching a tote bag full of tomatoes. Her eyes were kind, steady, the same eyes that had watched me grow up across the street. "I'm sorry if my comment stirred things up," she said gently. "But it needed to be said." I shook my head quickly. "No, don't apologize. You have no idea how much it meant to me. For so long I thought no one noticed." Her smile softened. "Oh, we noticed. The whole neighborhood noticed. People see more than you think. Your grandmother used to tell us all the time how proud she was of you, how strong you were. She wanted you to know you were never alone in this." I swallowed hard, blinking against the sting in my eyes. "Thank you. Really." She reached out, squeezing my hand. "Don't let them convince you otherwise. You did the right thing. And if they can't see it, that's their loss." As I walked home with a bag of peaches swinging at my side, the weight inside me shifted. For the first time, it wasn't just Grandma's voice or my own will holding me up. Someone outside the family had seen me, believed me, defended me. For years I had carried the shame of invisibility, convinced the whole world mirrored my parents' judgment. But here, in the sunlight of a bustling market with Mrs. Brown's words still echoing, I felt something new bloom in my chest. Validation. And it was stronger than any ultimatum my parents had ever thrown at me. 3 months passed, each week dragging Lily further down. Her performance reports came back red, full of missed targets and sloppy mistakes. Every Friday I could hear the muffled sound of Jennifer Wu's measured voice through the office vents below my apartment, laying out what Lily had failed to deliver. The walls carried it up to me like echoes of a courtroom where the verdict was already written. By the end of the quarter, the numbers were impossible to ignore. Sales had dropped under her campaigns, and even the interns whispered about how long she had left. HR scheduled a meeting for Monday morning, and I knew just by the tightness in the air what it would be. I watched from my window as cars pulled into the driveway. Jennifer's silver sedan, an HR manager I didn't know, and finally Daniel's black Tesla sliding into place with quiet authority. Inside the meeting room had been prepared. A folder sat in the center of the table, documents neatly stacked, each page stamped and signed. Lily walked in with her laptop clutched like armor, her parents trailing behind in spirit, if not in body. Jennifer began calmly. "Lily, we've reviewed your performance during the 3-month improvement plan. Unfortunately, your results have not met the required benchmarks. After consulting with HR, we've decided to terminate your employment effective immediately." Lily's face went slack. "No, this isn't fair. I tried." The HR manager spoke gently but firmly. "You'll receive severance consistent with company policy. We'll need your badge and equipment by the end of the day." Daniel remained quiet until the very end. His hands folded, his expression unreadable. When Lily turned to him, eyes wide with desperation, she nearly shouted, "Mr. Chen, please, you know me. You know my potential. Say something. He didn't flinch. This was not my decision. Lily, HR and your department director handled the review. My role here is simply to confirm it stands. Her chair screeched against the floor as she jumped up, tears streaking her face. This is her fault, she screamed, pointing at me where I stood in the doorway. Rachel ruined everything. She destroyed my career. I met her glare steadily. My voice was quiet, but it carried. No, Lily. You destroyed it yourself. She let out a ragged sob, then shoved past the HR manager, slamming the door on her way out. Papers fluttered from the table as the air rushed with her exit. Hours later, my phone rang. Dad's number glowed on the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. His voice was low, almost trembling with rage. Do you realize what you've done? You've torn this family apart. You've humiliated your sister, broken her future. You've destroyed us. I listened, letting his accusations wash over me. For once, they didn't pierce. They barely grazed the surface. When he finally paused, waiting for me to back down, I said evenly, No, Dad, you destroyed this family a long time ago. Before he could reply, I ended the call. The silence that followed was the most peaceful sound I had heard in years. A year slipped by, and life had settled into a rhythm I hadn't known I was capable of. My work as a CPA was steady, my consulting side jobs picked up after word spread that I was connected to Next Vision, and the modest dividends from my small shareholder stake gave me security I had never dreamed of. For the first time, money wasn't a shadow hanging over me. It was a foundation. But the apartment above Grandma's old garden was quiet now, no longer filled with the tension of Lily's footsteps or my parents' voices echoing in my head. Instead, I filled it with the smell of fresh coffee, the sound of records spinning on Sunday mornings, the calm of being left alone. One rainy afternoon, while organizing boxes I had never fully unpacked, I came across a small wooden chest tucked in the back of Grandma's closet. Inside were envelopes, each addressed in her looping handwriting. One was marked with my name. My hands shook as I opened it. My dearest Rachel, one day you will be forced to choose yourself over everyone else. Don't hesitate. Don't feel guilty. You have carried too much for too long. This inheritance is not a gift of money. It is a shield. Use it to build the life you deserve. Love, Grandma. I pressed the letter to my chest, the scent of lavender still faint in the paper tears blurring the words. She had known all along. She had known what I would face. Outside of family, the world around me had shifted too. At the farmer's market, Mrs. Brown greeted me with a warm smile every Saturday, slipping an extra bag of apples into my tote. Neighbors waved when I passed no longer with pity, but with recognition. They had seen the truth, and now they treated me as if I belonged, not just in Grandma's house, but in the neighborhood itself. And then there was Daniel. He had become less of a distant figurehead and more of a steady presence. Not constant, not overbearing, but every few months he'd call, "Board meeting's coming up, Rachel. You should be there." The first time I hesitated. But when I walked into that sleek boardroom, all glass and steel, Daniel introduced me to the other executives. This is Rachel Morgan, shareholder, and someone who understands the value of perseverance better than most. I shook hands, accepted their polite nods, and felt a quiet pride settle in. For once, I wasn't the forgotten daughter. I was a woman who had survived the storm and built something lasting from it. My parents had moved to Arizona, starting over in a place where no one knew their story. I heard through distant relatives that Lily had bounced from job to job, unable to hold on, still blaming me for every stumble. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Life had a way of teaching its own lessons. One evening, as I walked through the garden trimming the roses Grandma and I once planted together, I thought about everything that had happened. The shouting matches, the ultimatums, the silence that followed. The anger had dulled, now replaced with something steadier, clarity. I could almost hear her voice again, gentle and wise. The best revenge isn't anger, Rachel. It's a well-written contract. She was right. It wasn't about tearing anyone down. It was about finally standing tall myself. So I leaned on the porch railing, watching the last light of day fade, and whispered into the cool evening air, "I chose myself, Grandma, and I'm not sorry. If you've ever been forced to give up what was rightfully yours, if you've ever had to fight just to be seen, I want to hear your story. Share it with me, because none of us should ever feel alone in that battle. You're not alone."